So our next speaker, Xavier Noria from Barcelona. He's an independent Ruby on Rails consultant and also a core team member for Ruby on Rails. So yeah, well, his contributions. Whenever you go to contributors.rubyonrails.com or you reference a constant without requiring it, that's thanks to him. So enjoy your talk and see you in a minute. Bye.
Thank you. Okay. Sounds good? Yes? Yeah, okay. All right. So, as many of you, I've been programming for some years and have read a good deal of source code, you know, especially, I don't know, in the last 10, 12 years due to my involvement in open source and my consultant work. And over the years, you develop like intuitions about good code. Some of those intuitions or some of those personal preferences about what makes good code are of high level, like, I don't know, like object-oriented design, like how to organize code, usability of APIs, no? That kind of things. But sometimes you develop also intuitions for those tiny details in the source code, you know? Not only the big picture, but also little things that matter. And this talk is about those little things. So we are going to go through a series of real code that has like one line, maybe just a bunch of lines, and reflect about it, because it is not only a talk about best practices, something like that. It is in some sense, but also it is a talk in which I invite you to introspect a little bit and reflect and verbalize our thought process. Why do we believe that something can be refactored or something, you know, that tiny thing, it's important or something like that, okay? And there's going to be opinions in this talk. So I would like to say something about these kind of things, about opinions and discussions. And the thing is that often in discussions, either online or personally, we phrase things in a way that is more or less like, these are my reasonings, and you word the thing as if your preference or, you know, the option you want to, you prefer, follows from that. You know, it's a consequence of that. Like it was the natural consequence, the absolute consequences. And life is not an axiomatic system, you know? So there's no first order logic here to apply generally. So most of the time what you are doing really is you have, it goes the other way around. You have some preference and then you have some reasons that for you work, and the preference, you know, is your choice. But that reasoning is part of your background, is part of your trade-offs, is part of how your brain works. So when two people discuss the intersection of reasonings and the trade-offs and, you know, that kind of thing is very fuzzy, okay? So let's do an example with code. Okay, we have here a hash, and now we are going to see a little bit different this hash. The difference is in that comma. You see that comma? Okay, do you feel the tension with that comma? Okay. So for some people, the one at the bottom is the preferred one. And some arguments are like it's easier to add something, aesthetics, because I have a comma everywhere. If I add something, the patch is going to be cleaner because it's only the line that I'm touching. But other people don't care about that. So this is you value a cost benefit here that other people do not perceive the same way. So for other people, what they see here is a missing element. So their brain parsing here says there's a missing element here. Okay? So different pains. Which is the right answer to this? There's no right answer. It all depends on everyone. And so wording things that acknowledge this, I believe it's a good thing to do in discussions. Like always acknowledge that there's something subjective, there's something personal in the way you are reasoning. So introducing, in my opinion, in my view, that kind of things kind of relax and takes, something of the absolute tone out of the discussion. So saying that, the entire talk is going to be in my view, okay? So we have like a global thing that says this is all in my view, all right? So if in some slide I don't say it, it's implicit, okay? In my view, I'm going to say a number of things. Also, I'm going to speculate. So I'm going to put myself, I'm going to toggle this flag and allow myself to speculate sometimes and explain why I believe some things are the way they are. All right. So we are going to start talking about conciseness. Conciseness is using few words, not including extra or unnecessary information. This is a definition I took from some dictionary, and it mostly applies to natural language, okay? But we also know that it applies to programming languages. Let's take this example. So in this example, we have a collection which is remotes, and then we sort it and take the last element. Okay, so there's a more concise way to say this, which is to take the max element, okay? And the first version makes you think more, and it does more stuff, because you have to sort the entire collection, and then you take the last. And then when you read this code, you have to infer that you are going for the max element. You have to infer it. It's not clear, okay? So you have to say, okay, you have to connect the dots. I'm sorting, then therefore I'm going for the max. If you put the max here, it's instantly clear, all right? So conciseness translates in programming to a number of things generally. So generally, it means that you choose the most specific API call that you have, like in the previous case. Often, it involves less code. Often, the code is more clear. You apply Occam's razor. Occam's razor in several angles, because first, you ask specifically about what you need when you write concise code. And you are able to express yourself with precision, and also the reader of your code has this benefit, because it's more clear, it's more direct for the reader of the code, which is the intention. And as a consequence, often, and I'm saying often in every item, because this is not like always the case, but often you get better performance, because if you ask specifically about all you need to a library or an interpreter, generally the code that is going to implement that takes advantage that it only has to solve that particular problem. So generally you get better performance. These ones, for instance, taking the keys of a hash and then ask for include here. We have an API for that, right? This one is opening a file to dump an entire text into the file. And this was the idiom in 1.8, and still you see this code out there. But we have now an API for doing this. When I do reviews of Rails applications, to my surprise, this kind of code appears with some frequency. And I believe, and that's speculation mode, I believe people writing this kind of code are not thinking about using an ORM and the API and abstractions that the ORM provides. So this translates very directly to a select, okay? So I believe you are thinking here in SQL and, doing with Ruby the select. But the point of the ORM is to use the abstraction. So it's much more pleasant to say user.post. You are right. You are working at the model level. Your abstraction is closer to the problem domain. And an ORM has not been so. An ORM is not a black box. You have to know exactly what the ORM works. So for me, an ORM is, at least for doing queries, is just an SQL generator. So you have like a high-level interface to generate SQL, and you have to control what it's generating and everything. So you get the benefit of the generation, and you have to know what it's doing, but you have to work at this level of abstraction, at the model level. This I see often. So in this case, name is a string. And for some reason, you see the string interpolated in a string literal. Yeah, no need to do that. Just put as name, okay? I wonder here if people writing this kind of code is thinking visually, like you often write literals with puts, right? So maybe then you have the inertia to write the literal because you are used to it and do not think that you do not need it, but visually you are used to see the quotes next to put as, and maybe that, that makes you do not realize that you do not need it. And this is a particularly frequent case of this thing, which is you have method name that it's already a string, and then you interpolate it to build this symbol thing. I see this often, and maybe the reason here is that, for instance, for many years we have had to include modules dynamically using sen. So when you write the literal, you normally use a symbol. That's more or less conventional. You use a symbol. So sen include something for active record, whatever. And maybe that's again inertia. So you are using it visually to see the symbol, and when you are dynamically building something, you go for the symbol. But other people write this to sim, but there's no need to do a sim because the string just works, okay? This is another one. Here we are testing for a substring. You see? So we are testing if the constant Ruby platform has Java within. This code looks like very lightweight, but it's doing a bunch of things. So this is a regular expression. So there's an engine going on that is going to do the match. That sounds a little bit complicated. Also, it's going to have a side effect, like setting, these variables. So which was the match, which was the prefix of the match, what comes after that, captures, if there are captures, and there are a bunch of side effects of running this code. In 2.4, we are going to have a predicate, which is more concise. If you do not need anything of any of those side effects, you can ask with the predicate to see, I only care if it matches, and that it's going to return a Boolean. Since the side effects do not need to be computed, this is one of the cases where performance is much better because the engine does not need to do all of that work. And the performance is like twofold or maybe a little bit more, But also, we have include in a string. You can just, so we are looking for a substring, we have an API for doing that. No need to go to a regular expression. So normally I tend to use the last one, include, because it's kind of more, it's more concise. But I have also to say that the first one, even with all the warnings that I've said, somehow maybe reads better. So in many cases, I think there's no, so there are a little bit of tension, you know? You maybe see the tension and maybe personally say, okay, I will go with this one. But it's not like black and white. So even if the first one is like not concise in this way, superficially you don't see it. And indeed, if you read this kind of pattern matching to look for substrings, then when you read this code and you are used to it, you do not read it like I'm doing a pattern matching, you know, and all the stuff that is going on. You read it like a unit, okay? And that's, for instance, to say another example, in other languages. Other languages, if you want to look for a substring, there's no API, and they have to do this. So you compute if there's a position within the string where the argument, you know, is contained, and that gives you an integer, and then you have to check whether it's, in this case, different from -1. So conceptually, I've said a number of things, okay? But if you are a programmer in a language that has this as a way to look for expressions, indeed, I believe you do not parse this following this reasoning. So your brain is used to this construction, and when it sees, it automatically, you know, gets the unit and says, okay, I'm looking for a substring. Redundant selves, you also see them often in source code. Most of the time, there are some exceptions, but most of the time, you do not need a self in Ruby. So this is the same code without the self. And this is conventionally what we generally prefer. And particularly with new, you see this more often than with other methods. New is nothing special. It's just a method. So in this code could be, well, it is the code for some kind of singleton thing, right? So no need to put self before new. And I wonder if you come from other languages where new is a keyword, maybe you have like, you know, some mismatch here writing or seeing new this naked, you know? Maybe you have a little mismatch and prefer to qualify it. I don't know, but it's not necessary. And this is the redundant self that I by far see more frequently, which is inactive record. For some reason, I don't know, I very often see ID qualified by self. I don't know why, but you do not need it, ID, just ID. Like name, this name, we do not qualify name. Why do we qualify ID? I don't know. I wonder if the reason is that ID is so short that you want it to, you know, to be more obvious. I don't know. I don't know the reason, but I have to tell you that this self ID is very common. So this is redundancy, and I would like to reflect a little bit about whether it's perceived in a universal way. So in the Ruby community, as a convention, we do not write self. So it is expected that our code does not have selves. We perceive it as a redundancy. But in Python, it's the other way around. So in Python, you have to write selfs. And Python people do not talk about redundancy. Python people talk about explicitly. You see, so two angles of the same thing. We see redundancy where others see implicitly, and they prefer to be explicit. And I always like to be aware of these things, because it allows you to take some distance, you know, from these things. So some distance. So you play by the rules. If you are writing Ruby, you're going to write idiomatic Ruby. You are not going to write redundant selfs. But there's a very huge social aspect of this, I believe. It's just that the community has converged to this kind of conventions. It's not like absolute thing. There's a mix of expectations, and that you want your code to look similar to the code that you get out there. You know, it's all the cultural thing about it. But it's not an absolute aspect of it. So, yeah, that's nice to have into account. All right, now we are going to talk about readability. To say it shortly, enjoyable and easy to read. So easy to read, very vague, enjoyable, important. So it's not just that you have to enjoy it, reading a readable code, okay? That's the idea. Let's see this again. All the snippets are real, okay? So let's see this, return ID unless not name blank. First thing, if we can, sometimes we cannot, but if we can, it's better to avoid negations. Why? Because our brain is not a logic machine. So our brain, for some reasons, has difficulties, generally speaking, with negations. You have to work a little bit more, you know, to figure out the meaning of this. In this particular case, we just can say name present, okay? That's it, easier. You have to work less, okay? That's the way the brain works. But still, for some people, me include, unless has like a negation within it. I know that some people have no issue with unless, like they instantly understand the unless. But for me, unless, it's still a little bit more of work, because I am seeing what does not have to happen, you know? What I'm reading is what does not have to happen in order to run the thing in the left. So the way I work, at least, it's still not there. So this is the one that I prefer. So it's like everything is affirmative, you know? What you see is what, you know, everything is, there's no second level of anything, you know? So every code in positive is generally easier to read. Backslashes in literals. Not nice, not nice. So, yeah, so this thing, you are counting the backslash, then, okay, undo this thing in my brain, then. No, so in Ruby, fortunately, we have several ways to write this kind of literals, like in regular expressions, in strings. You can do this. And so the best practice here would be try to avoid backslashes as much as possible in the literals, all right? And if this feels a little bit heavier, you can use actually some punctuation and some other characters to delimit. As long as the punctuation is not present in the literal, you can do it. And this one feels like even more lighter, you know? But in any case, backslashes, we try to avoid them. This one has, I don't know, every time I see this, I have to, okay, so the thing is, so the situation here is that you have a file, say config.ru or something like that, and you want to load another file, in this case boot, rb, that belongs to the same directory. So if you are used to file system hierarchies, that kind of thing, for the natural thing, so you are at the same level conceptually. And doing this contortion is like unnatural, don't you think? So we have this pseudo-constant file, which is the point of reference of expand path. And then you have to do dot dot. And dot dot, for me, dot dot is about directories. It's difficult for me so I have to think, okay, I'm in a file, so the dot dot is the directory of the file. I have to think a lot. And yeah, so we have had to write this for a number of years, but in 2.0 we got dir, which is the current directory, the directory of the current file. Okay, so this is more natural in my view. This is more natural, and these remarks apply to expand path in isolation. But in the particular case of require, we still have even something easier, which is just require relative boot and done, okay? You know this saying, always code as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent psychopath. Who knows where you live? There's another saying like this, that is the maintainer of this code could be your future self. Yeah, there's nice sayings, but for my taste, they are too self-centered. Like let's write readable code because otherwise bad things can happen. Although, could be myself not understanding or whatever. But I would like to reward this kind of sayings and say just constantly think of the readers of your code. Not because of you, because you'll be gone, but because of them. So write readable code and document the whys in your code. If you have ever done maintenance of a previous code base, for sure you've seen pieces of code that nobody knows why they are there. The logic is not clear. Can we remove this shit? Nobody knows, so you keep it for years. That kind of thing. Document the whys. Not because of you, because you'll be gone, but because of them. Because of the greatest of the qualities a programmer can have, in my view, which is empathy. And empathy, there are a number of ways to be empathic. You can show that when related with other team members. You can show that when review a pull request. You can show that or practice that in a number of things. But for me, the ultimate expression of empathy in a programmer is in the way they program. Okay. So let's go back to snippets. And now we are talking about ordering. Other things naturally. Sometimes in your code, you're writing things that have like a natural order of some sort, okay? So for instance, you are reading a class top to bottom, which is the normal thing to do, and you find last name. Okay, so there's an alert in your brain, last name. Where's the first name? Okay? Where is you see it at the bottom. Oh, okay, it's there. Okay, there's a little disconcert, for a moment. But if you just do it naturally, like first name first and last name there, then it flows, right? This is the declaration of some timestamps, okay? Delete that, create that, update that. Again, real examples. So you see delete that, and your mind has to check. The three of them are there. Do I have everything? Because if you write created that, you first create things, then maybe you update things, maybe then you delete. That's the natural thing, okay? So the second one, in my opinion, flows better. You have to think less. Another typical one, you have some arguments in a method definition, and then for some reason you assign things in different order. this could be, maybe we had first 2 arguments, and then someone adds a 3rd argument, and then it goes to the first line, and just add it there, you know, the assignment. But your mind is like checking things, you know? Okay, this is that one, you know, you are crossing things, you know? Much easier to follow the order, okay? So protocol, host, and your brain parses this much more easily. But as I said, very, very rarely this is going to be black and white. And sometimes the decision is not clear or have different cons and pros, and you finally have to choose something. But sometimes it's not like 100% very, very clear. For instance, we are here constructing an object passing a couple of attributes to it, a name and email. And in this example, we assume that there's an args thing that has a hash with some values, okay? So we see repetition here, right? And you have to check things. So you have to check that name goes with name, there are no typos, that email goes with email, args is written twice. In active support, we have a slice, okay? So this is more concise. A slice is more concise because this is actually saying, I want this subhash, okay? So a slice, if someone does not know this method, is going to take name and email and you get a hash, a subhash with just these 2 keys. Well, actually, both examples are not equivalent, because a slice, if the key is not present, it is not present in the hash that it returns, whereas this new method is going in the one at the top is going always to receive both keys. But let's imagine that doesn't matter, okay? But yeah, more concise, and I would probably choose the second one, probably. But I have to admit that maybe the first one is more clear. I don't know. More questions than answers in this talk. This one, you call super, get something that you modify, it's a hash, and then you return the hash. Well, we have a specific idiom nowadays to do this, which is tap. So you tap, and then you modify, and the result of this is supposed to be a mutable thing. Of course, in the block, you can do everything. Maybe you do not mutate it, but normally that's the use case, okay? And I do prefer tap, because tap is saying to the reader of the code, I'm going to pick this, and I'm going to return before you read anything else. So you are set about what's going to happen. Whereas in the previous one, you have to infer. So I have this value, and this value is the one that I'm going to return from the method or the expression or whatever. So yeah, so there's more going on. You have to think more in the first case, in my view, and the second one is more concise. And the second one is the one that I normally prefer, because it communicates better. Nevertheless, I know many people that prefer the first option, because there's less things, you know, there's less abstractions, less API, less stuff going on, because they perceive simpler code in the first version. No right answer. All right. Now we are going to talk about precision, being precise in your code. This is an experiment I did in Rails. I wrote an auto-explain, so if you had a threshold and a query was running for too long in development mode, you could have an explain in the log automatically. But I did an experiment, which was to put the units in the name of the config variable. Okay, so it was auto-explain threshold in seconds. It's longer, but when you go to the configuration and want to tweak this thing, it's absolutely clear what you have to, which is the unit, which is often not the case in many of these kind of things. You have to check the documentation, you know? And if you are reading the implementation and you see auto-explain threshold in seconds compared to time new, I don't know, whatever, you know, you do not need to have in mind or go to check which was the unit of this thing, because I am not familiar with the code. It's obvious. In every code review I do of Rails application, there's a grep that I run in the project checking for has many without dependent. So this has many normally means you are going to have orphan records. And in every project I have reviewed, I believe I have found some of these. So you know, when you delete something to have the database consistent, you have to normally delete children, so, and grandchildren, you know, all the descendants. Sometimes you have other options to do, but you normally have to take a decision. So a blank has many comments like this. Normally, it's telling you that something is missing here. You have to take a explicit decision about what to do with the children. And oh yeah, okay. I want to add here that you can have as many without this thing if you configure foreign keys that delete when you delete records, and that's the option I normally use, because in my experience, before destroy callbacks are not you do not have before destroy callbacks that often, and many times the easiest thing to do is just to put the foreign key cascade, and then you know when you delete something, the database takes care of all the descendants. You know, you have to do nothing. And then if you have the exception, which is to have a before destroy, then you have to do other things, you know. But a blank one, normally, bad sign. Logger, taking a standard output from the constant. Conventionally, in Ruby programs, the standard output is in this global variable. Okay, so the constant has like the original stream in the process. But the variable, programs can change the variable, and that's what when you use print, putS, and this kind of I/O, they go to the global variable. So if you change it, you know, everything is going to respect that. So it's you know, it's playing by the rules to use the global variable instead of the constant. Also in test suites, if you use the global variable, since the API uses the global variable, you can capture standard output just by assigning a string IO or something, you know, to this thing temporarily and then reset it. You cannot do that with the constant. So if you are using the constant in a library or something, then the third parties are not able to mock that, okay? And now let's talk about regular expressions. Another saying, some people when confronted with the problem think, I know, I use a regular expression, and now they have two problems. And I have to say this is bullshit. And it's bullshit in my opinion. So regular expressions are super powerful, and I believe it should be in the toolbox of every programmer. They are super powerful, and you know, used in you know, in the place that they make sense, like any other tool. If you do not know regular expressions, you are lacking a lot of power that they bring. And I am going to talk about anchors. This caret and this dollar. Yes, so let's suppose this is a regular expression to check for usernames. And you have to know that the anchor anchors at the beginning of lines or beginning of a string. Beginning of lines or beginning of a string. So it's not the beginning of a string. It also matches on beginning of lines. So you can have this matches, okay? You have a hack, then a new line, and a valid username. Since the regular expression is checking, anchoring to just any line, is going to pass, and the hack is in. So talking about precision, use the anchor A when you mean A. A is beginning of a string. That's specifically beginning of a string. So use A when you mean A. Sometimes you may think, I'm doing just this little thing, I will relax and just use the caret, okay? Like going through a file system like this, if the file name starts with something, well, let's relax. But then the question is, can a file name have new lines? If this is just a quick script, you are doing a quick and dirty thing, maybe it's enough. If you are working in a generic library or something like that, maybe you have to be more careful. Can a file name have new lines? So if in this moment you are wondering that, that's the point. So no need to wonder about that. And the answer is yes, it can have new lines. But why can it have new? I don't know. Well, let's use the card. No. Just use A when you mean A. Similar with dollar. Dollar means end of line or end of a string, and we have capital Z and lowercase z. Capital Z means end of a string with an optional new line, and lowercase z means end of a string. So capital A goes with lowercase z. Okay, that's the pair. And yeah, so with using dollar, we have the same kind of things. I'm not going to put more examples about this, but I want to talk about the origin of this misuse of the often misuse of the caret, of these anchors. And the thing is that the anchor normally means a start of a string. For instance, the caret means start of a string in many places. And the dollar normally means end of a string except for an optional new line. So if you do any of these things and maybe more, that's the meaning of these anchors unless you pass a flag. If you pass a flag, then you get the multi-line thing. But by default they mean capital A and capital Z. So the thing is that we are exposed to a lot of regular expressions out there in Stack Overflow. If you've done any of these other languages, you are exposed to a lot of regular expressions that use the anchors with the meaning of the capital letters, okay? And I believe that's possibly the reason why so many people, even in Rails, even in documentation, we have had this issue sometimes, okay? So it's very common to see it. But again, we have a problem here, because probably underscore AD dollar is more readable than \Z. Probably. To me, it feels lighter somehow. This backslash bad. I don't know. So no absolute right or wrong answer. And finally, I want to talk just briefly about code style. So style guidelines and that kind of thing. So in this talk, we have not talked about code style. We had the first example with that comma, but for me, code style does not belong to these kind of things. So in general, I don't care about your particular, whether you put when indented or with case or that kind of thing. I think that's really, really, really unimportant. The only thing that I believe it's important about style is that in every project or in every company, there's consistency. So that when you open any of the files of that project, of that company, what you see is always the same kind of thing, because the consistency makes going through the files easier, because your brain is used to parse a certain style. So for instance, if you ever seen method declarations in the Seattle RB style without parentheses, the first time you see that, it feels strange, okay? It feels strange because your brain is not used to it, not because intrinsically is bad or right, is right or wrong. Just because you normally parse parentheses, and the lack of parentheses makes you, wait for a moment, okay, I need to go, character by character to parse this thing. But if you are doing Seattle RB for 1 month, it's going to be like this, because then your brain is used to it. So consistency in the code base is the only thing that I think it matters. And the specific rules, for me particularly, as time passes, I don't have any, I can work with any rules. I don't care. I only care about consistency. And I have to do a hat tip here for EuRuKo, because as years pass, I see more and more projects using EuRuKo in their code bases. And I believe this is really good. And this wouldn't be possible without the work that I think is going to be difficult, because EuRuKo, I believe, is the perfect project to go bike shedding everything. I don't know, it seems like a difficult project. So hat tip to the EuRuKo people, and thanks very much.
So thanks, Xavier, for your awesome talk.